Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it 1 or 2 minutes longer before we start. Hope that's okay with everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name's Mark Flynn. It's great to see such an excellent turnout today on our Introducing Multi-Factor Authentication webinar. Let me start by introducing Matt Blackwell from Microsoft, who will be taking us through the key features and benefits of MFA. Matt, do you want to just say a quick hi?
Yep, thanks, Mark. Good morning to everybody. Pleasure to be here.
Great, thanks, Matt. For any questions, and be great to get some questions just to make this interactive and give as much value as we possibly can, there's a Q&A button in the top right hand corner. So if you've got any questions, please post them in there and we'll answer as many as we possibly can during the 30-minute webinar, but most definitely follow those up a little bit later. Briefly, I would just like to say a few words about Bedrock. Yes, we provide a full range of outsourced IT services, but we work on the premise what gets measured gets done. So our USP is to measure the IT things that really indicate how healthy your business is, to make sure your IT is fully aligned to your business goals and you're spending that money wisely. Now, alongside running some or all of your IT, we provide a board pack consisting of dashboards that tell you how the business of IT is supporting the business, be that measuring the effectiveness of your IT spend and the cost reduction initiatives we might be focused on, the security of your business, or possibly the productivity, which is important these days, of your people. Take, for example, the productivity of your people, identifying where the hotspots of Teams usage is, which teams are using video most, so you can start asking what value are they getting from Teams and what changes you should be making to make sure everybody's following what you define as best practice for driving productivity improvements across your organization. Now, the world has changed a lot over the last 3 or 4 months. I'm stating a very big obvious there. And the only guarantee is that there'll be an awful lot more change as the economy continues to suffer. And fingers crossed, we'll see a rapid bounce back, that V-shaped bounce back they keep talking about come 2021. So what have we learned over the last 3 to 4 months? For example, we probably don't need to have such big offices. There's a big opportunity for us to reduce our office rental costs. Not every meeting has to be face-to-face, and people are as productive, so everyone keeps saying, working from home as in the office. So basically, no one is going to be office-based. everybody needs to be set up to be 100% mobile. Even with people that say they want to be in an office, they're probably only going to be there present in that office for a maximum of 3 days, probably 2 or 3 days. So there's no point in building out a rich office-centric infrastructure. Everything's got to be centered around the laptop and the smart device, the smartphone, the iPad, and so whatever you've got as those ancillary devices. And they've got to operate securely wherever you might work, be that in the head office when you do visit, competing with your kids on the home network. That is often classed as the new front line of securing your corporate business. And using the WeWork Wi-Fi as part of that team meeting, because there's going to be that kind of hybrid mix of, yes, you're going to have a head office, might be a little bit smaller. You'll have these kind of pop-up kind of WeWork type facilities you'll want to use as a team for weekly catch-ups. But also, you've got to take into account that you are going to be using insecure Starbucks style Wi-Fi networks as well. So you've got this very much flexible, very mobile, fluid working environment where we've got to make sure that everybody is as productive as they possibly can be. But the big question is, can you secure this flexible new way of working? And is it sufficient? Is it sufficiently secure for the corporate world? So today, we're going to answer some of those questions, looking at how we can use multi-factor authentication to secure this new way of working, this accelerated digital transformation that's gone on in the way we're going to be working moving forward. Anyway, and that said, Matt, over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Mark, and a very warm welcome to everybody who's on this webinar this morning. So we will be covering off, as Mark has mentioned, a little bit around multi-factor authentication and an introduction to that. So I will go ahead and I will quickly share my screen. So hopefully that's come up for everybody now.
Not quite, Matt.
Hopefully that's come up now.
Perfect.
Brilliant. So as we said, really today's session is going to be around an introduction to multi-factor authentication, including kind of the different types of MFA, the benefits of using it, and probably a little bit around kind of today's phishing environment that we find ourselves in. Now, obviously, MFA it's a very topical subject when it comes to remote working, and in particular with Teams. So as Mark has just mentioned, due to quite a largely remote workforce over the last few months, the need to access applications like Teams from a variety of locations really has become very crucial to maintaining that very collaborative culture that workplaces thrive on. Now, it's been a huge trust exercise, I think it's fair to say, to provide employees with the ability to work autonomously. But as we all know, with that trust comes potential security risks, and really businesses are needing to balance security with usability. So really kind of building on the previous session that we've done around Teams, users they're not just communicating in real time through the platform. They may also be sharing sensitive information, through the file sharing capabilities, or working on projects in a shared team site. Now, all of this mandates that only certain people have access to Teams, but more crucially, that actually accessing it is easy and very straightforward. So kind of let's jump into what is MFA, an introduction to MFA. So multi-factor authentication is really an authentication method in which a computer user is granted access only after they successfully present usually 2 or more pieces of evidence or factors to an authentication mechanism. Now, two-factor authentication helps you access your accounts kind of more securely, especially when you're viewing kind of sensitive information. Now, as we all know, passwords can be very easily forgotten, they can be stolen, they can be compromised. So really, two-factor authentication, it's an additional security step that really helps you protect your accounts by making it harder for other people to break into. Now, you can also use the Microsoft Authenticator app in kind of a variety of ways. Things like being able to respond to a prompt for authentication after you sign in with your username and password, the ability to sign in without entering a password using your username on Authenticator app and your mobile device with something like your face, fingerprint, or a PIN. And finally, you can use it as a code generator for any other accounts that support the Authenticator apps. So kind of just very kind of broad introduction to MFA there and what is it. Now, we get a lot of users of MFA who want to look for, why would I use it? What are the real kind of tangible benefits? And really it comes into kind of three areas. So the first of which is around free and easy. So you can create a free account where you can enable MFA and you can prompt users for additional verification. Secondly, obviously a big piece of this is around it protecting your identities. So by enabling MFA, we've actually found that you're probably about 99.9% less likely to have your accounts compromised. And probably the last one and most important, I think, from our perspective, is the ability to use it across multiple applications. So, this provides users really with a secure, seamless access to all of their apps with a single sign-on from any location or device. Now, that's especially important, as we just discussed, really in today's landscape, where users are logging in from a variety of IP addresses, from a variety of different physical locations. So let's kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into those benefits. So from a free and easy perspective, Microsoft are applying security defaults for all license levels, even trial tenants, really to ensure that every account can be protected by MFA. Now, these baseline policies really are a set of predefined policies that help protect organizations against a lot of the common attacks that we see nowadays. Now, those common attacks can include things like password spray, password replay, which we'll come on to in a little bit more detail, and phishing attacks, which again we will look at a little bit more detail around what does that landscape look like today, especially with a remote workforce, and how can you use MFA to ultimately protect yourselves. Now, the baseline policies are available in all editions of Azure Active Directory, and really Microsoft are making these baseline protection policies available to everybody because, as we know, identity-based attacks have been on the rise over the last few years, and to be honest, over the last few months we've certainly seen a spike. And then finally, the ability to challenge users when we see risk leads to about a 6 times decrease in the compromise rate of accounts. Now, that means that even as Microsoft has seen a substantial increase in users, in particular with something like Teams over the last few months, it's actually meant that we have seen actually fewer compromised accounts than ever before by people actually implementing MFA. When we look at kind of protecting identities, really multi-factor authentication, as we said, is a process where a user is prompted during the sign-in process for an additional form of identification, such as entering a code on your phone or to provide a fingerprint scan. Now, if you only use a password to authenticate a user, it really leaves a very insecure route for attack. Now, if that password is weak or it's been exposed elsewhere, is it really the user that's signing in with their username and password, or potentially could it be an attacker? Now, when you require a second form of authentication, security is very much increased, as that additional factor usually isn't something that's easy for an attacker to obtain or duplicate. Now, as I mentioned before, telemetry tells us more and more that about 99.9% of organization account compromises could actually be stopped by using something as simple as MFA. Now, there's always that classic 3 factors around MFA in terms of the 3 types of Azure MFA. So the first one is something so that's typically something like a password. The second one is something you have. So that's typically something like a trusted device, something that's not easily duplicated, like a phone or a hardware key. And the final one, which is the one that I always forget, is around something that you are. So things like biometrics or a fingerprint or a face scan, which we'll come on to in a little bit more detail. And then the final area around kind of using it across multiple applications. So single sign-on really adds security and convenience when users sign on to applications in Azure Active Directory. We know that many organizations rely on software as a service style applications such as Office 365, Dropbox, Salesforce for end user productivity. And historically, IT staff needed to individually really create and update user accounts in each of those SaaS applications, and users needed to remember a password for each. We've probably all been in that position where you have multiple different tabs, multiple different applications open, and you have varying degrees of password complexity and strength for each of them. Now, the Azure Marketplace actually has over 3,000 applications with pre-integrated single sign-on connections, which really makes it easier to integrate them into your tenant. And as we've mentioned before, the ability to kind of seamlessly access those applications without any interruptions to the working day is crucial today. So we all know that at the moment, with everybody having a very remote workforce, the ability to actually just sign into applications easily without needing IT to do things like remote accessing of laptops is really, really crucial, because we don't now have that touch point and comfort of having IT in the office. So we get a lot of end users that will look at, actually, why would I use MFA and why is it important to use MFA? So, let's look at something like password strength as a first example. So we hear a lot about, hackers who use increasingly complex and creative methods of guessing and compromising passwords. Now, in actual fact, the reality of that is that passwords are usually very short, they're very personal to the user, or they have a way of being tracked back to that user's personal details. So we've probably all had the instance, for example, on Facebook, where somebody will ask, actually, what's your elf name based on, the first letter of your surname and the month you were born. In actual fact, they are very, very basic phishing attempts to be able to obtain information about that user. Now, really, by ensuring that that password strength is employed, such as things like minimum length, upper and lower cases, and non-repeat, that reduces the risk of hackers being able to actually brute force that password. Next, when we look at the time-saving element, really, there's the time-saving element that comes with not having to change your password at set times of the month or year. Over time, and I'll say I'm guilty of this myself, users will typically recycle passwords over and over. They will, maybe add a number to the end of the password, and often they'll use the same passwords on multiple devices. Now, by utilizing MFA, you're not potentially going to be able to stop your users using the same sort of combination of passwords, but you can minimize the risk involved if they do. And then finally, when we look at the level of security, the password is usually the last line of defense against hackers accessing company or personal data. But by layering and securing through MFA, you can make sure that actually that last line of defense isn't reached or even needed. So if a hacker guesses your password, they are very unlikely to also know other things about you or your users that would be required to bypass MFA. So really, to kind of sum that up, MFA is a very low effort, low cost method of ensuring those that wish to access your data maliciously can't do so. And it's worth just talking a little bit around the kind of different types of MFA. It's not just the kind of email verification. It comes in different forms, such as something like Windows Hello. So within Windows 10, Windows Hello for Business replaces passwords with strong two-factor authentication on PCs and mobile devices. Now, that authentication consists of a new type of user credential that's tied to a device and uses, things like a biometric or a PIN. Then you've got, Windows Hello, which addresses probably the following problems, I would say, in most cases. Things like strong passwords, as we've already mentioned, they can be very difficult to remember, and users often reuse passwords on multiple sites, so it will combat that. Equally, when we look at things like server breaches, that can expose symmetric network credentials, like passwords. Equally, passwords are subject to things like replay attacks, and as we mentioned before, users can inadvertently expose their passwords due to phishing attacks. We also look at things like hardware tokens, so things like automatically generated, one-time password, which is based on open authentication or OAuth. When we also look at things like FIDO, so FIDO2, which is a fast identity online, that basically gives you the ability to sign in without a username or password by using an external USB or a near-field communication. Now, fast identity online, really standards come in place of a password. So there are various different ways and types of MFA that you can use for your organization. Equally, one of the ones that I use very regularly myself is around the text or voice authentication. So things like being able to receive a code on your mobile phone via SMS. So, an SMS is sent to the mobile phone number, which contains a verification code. You enter that verification code in the sign-in interface to continue. So these are all different methods of using MFA and securing your business, but it's important to know which is going to be best utilized by your users and which is going to prevent kind of day-to-day disruption of the working day. So it's really important for us to kind of position a little bit around the environment that we find ourselves in at the moment around kind of phishing attacks. So, phishing attacks, really, we all know them. There are attempts to steal sensitive information through things like emails, websites, text messages, or other forms of electronic communication that often, look to be or purport to be from legitimate companies or individuals. Now, there's various different types of phishing attempts, such as things like spear phishing, which is very targeted phishing that involves very highly customized content. One that I've learned very, very recently is a term around whaling. So that is where attacks are actually specifically directed towards higher or senior executive members of a business. Equally, you've got things like business email compromise, which involves getting access to company networks through things like spear phishing. So as we mentioned before, social media is being an ever more present way of obtaining that personal information. I mentioned the example before around, guess what your elf name is by giving specific information around what's your favorite color, your birth month, and they're the kinds of questions that attackers will ask really to gain access. Now, official statistics probably indicate that about 1 in every sort of 99 emails is usually a phishing attack. Now, when you scale that up, that amounts to about 4.8 emails per employee in a 5-day week. Now, ultimately, what MFA helps to protect against are those phishing attacks in the instance where an attacker gains access to someone's credentials. Again, it's very unlikely that they will have the necessary information to be able to also bypass MFA. So with this kind of image here, what we kind of want to just make you aware more than anything is that really Microsoft has very much moved from being kind of a challenger to becoming a leader in endpoint protection platforms and unified endpoint management. Over a period of just kind of 3 years, Microsoft has very much gone from being a challenger in security to being an industry leader. Every year, Microsoft invests more than $1 billion in security, and really with EMS kind of now leading the charge alongside other household names such as Symantec or Kaspersky. Now, really what this kind of shows is that Microsoft really isn't being reactive to threats. We are very much being proactive. So Microsoft security doesn't just defend against an attack or a virus. It actually analyzes that virus or attack and produces ways to combat it in the future as well. So I think what I'm kind of trying to get at with this slide is we don't just want to throw big numbers at you. What we're trying to kind of get across is that we want everybody to be protected in the best way possible within their business. It's one of the main reasons why a lot of businesses are very quickly moving to the MFA landscape to make sure that their workforces are protected as much as possible. And then kind of, these images should probably, a few of you may be familiar with the types of different MFA that you have. But one thing to note is that, MFA, it's not that difficult to set up for your organization. And really, you don't need to have kind of in-house experts that are on hand to enable it. Setup and user training really can be implemented very, very quickly. And that's why we always encourage kind of leaning and leveraging the industry professionals such as, the likes of Bedrock to support you in that. But hopefully, the above illustrates some of the screens that many of you be familiar with around MFA. So as a kind of, I suppose, call to action here, what we recommend is that you kind of review your current security postures. As we've already sort of detailed within here, the likelihood is, as we adapt to the new normal, is that workforces will now adopt remote working as BAU in their everyday setup. That could be 50-50, it could be 1 day a week, whatever that might be. But even that 1 day a week presents an opportunity for credentials and accounts to be compromised. So, if that was to be the case with your own business, is your security posture up to this task? And really, do your workers have the ability and the adequate security in place to continue to be productive, but also protected? The second point is around actually try going passwordless. Implement MFA into your organization. We still speak to a lot of organizations who solely rely on passwords as a way of securing their business. But as we've seen already, passwords don't always provide fail-safe security that you need to prevent compromise. And then finally, we would recommend that you utilize any relevant support documentations to quickly and easily enable MFA in your organization, whether that be from just a general kind of setup and implementation perspective. So with that, that's all from me. Many thanks for everybody for listening. I'll hand back to Mark. I think you may be on mute, Mark.
It's a schoolboy error, wasn't it? Matt, thanks for that. It's great. It's great to re-emphasize. We might all be familiar with MFA. We all think it's obviously that we're using MFA, but it's great to have that emphasis that it's got to be a fundamental building block of your security strategy when securing that corporate business, which is increasingly more flexible and remote and virtual, etc. Now, Bedrock, we're a 100% virtual business, 100% remote business. We have been since day zero. We were formed with that in mind as a principle of how we're going to operate an organization. And we're very proud of that. We're a thriving, successful IT outsourcing business. And we've got a lot to share, and we're working with a lot of organizations at the moment that are going full in with becoming a 100% virtual organization or 100% remote business, where one organization we're working with, they're handing the keys back to the 27,000 square foot of prime London office space. They've tried to engage with their landlord, failed, so bang, they're handing the keys back and everybody's going to be working from home. Other organizations we're working with at the moment, well, they still need some office space. They still need, in a professional services capacity, some meeting rooms with a name above that meeting room or set meeting rooms, which portray the right kind of image for that organization. But they're still saving substantial amounts of money. One organization is going to go down that route, so be a hybrid kind of organization, we call it, but still saving 60% of their rental costs. So it's compelling to look at how you can become that 100% virtual or 100% remote organization, or become that hybrid using the best of both worlds to suit the way you do business. And to help other organizations that are considering that process and going on that journey, then we're offering a high level initial assessment of how to become a thriving, successful 100% or hybrid remote business. And if you want to take advantage of that free high-level assessment and take advantage of all the knowledge and experience that we've built up over the years and that we're sharing with other organizations, please drop me an email. You can see it on the screen, and be happy to engage with that high-level assessment. Now, you might not want to go down that route at this stage. You might simply want to look at feeding your brain. You might want to carry on doing a little bit more study work. So we have some self-help content you might be interested in consuming. This includes a summer webinar series. The MFA event today is part of that. And it's all about how to get the most from Microsoft Teams, either as an IT admin person or as a user that wants to learn how they can take full advantage of Teams as a user. So we've got 2 streams running throughout the rest of the summer. Alternatively, or secondly, to complement that, we've also launched a 7-part video series which looks beyond the technology, because it's not just the technology got to get right, it's all about the people. And if you want to become a successful 100% remote business, so for example, tips on how to thrive as a remote worker. Yeah, it's an alien experience. I'm locked up in this home office situation. How can I be the best possible person I can? How can I be as productive as I possibly can? How can we supercharge a remote working culture? People are a funny lot. They want to belong to something, yeah, an entity. And that's what we class as the culture of the organization. They want to do the right by the organization. So what does the right thing look like, and how do I go about doing that? And that really is what the culture is all about. So how do I supercharge? How do I create? How do I maintain the culture of our organization when I rip away the 4 walls of our office space? And how do I become a remote meeting ninja? Yeah, how do I make sure that remote meetings we make the most of? What are the techniques? What are the tactics we should employ as individuals and as an organization through policies to make sure remote meetings are as effective as possible? Because everybody says, hey, I'm as productive as possible. I'm as productive, if not more productive, working from home as I'm in the office. Well, hell, one of the key building blocks here is making sure you do become that remote meeting ninja, and everybody does. And finally, and seriously, how to go about combating stress and loneliness. That is such a big thing you've got to combat if you are going to become that 100% or hybrid remote organization. Anyway, please consume that content. Engage with us if you want to do that high-level assessment. Matt, thanks for outlining how fundamental MFA as a building block is for securing this new way of working. That's it. We've run out of time. All the best, and I look forward to meeting you all again soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.